An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Before I get started on what I primarily want to talk about this morning, I was at MoCA just a day or two ago, Museum of Contemporary Art, and I was really blown away by one of the exhibitions that's on display there currently. And lo and behold, in this morning's paper, there's a very nice piece about one aspect of one of the exhibitor's works. And it just a coincidence, he happens to be a Buddhist, a native of Taiwan by the name of Li Mingwei. And it ties in nicely, I think, to what we've recently been looking at with our study of the Diamond Sutra, and particularly generosity, dana, because the three works he has there, if we can call them works, are kind of interactive artistic pieces, interactive in ways I'll try to describe to you, that invite us into this practice of generosity in some pretty neat ways. I'll begin with the most powerful one, which is the one that's focused on in this article, sonic blossom. Sonic references the role of a trained soprano voice. And the practice of generosity here, these photos are taken from a recent enactment of this work at the Art Museum, not MoCA, but the Art Museum. And the soprano comes into the gallery dressed in a costume that's designed by Li Mingwei. It has Chinese, Japanese influences on the attire, very colorful, and she just they have a chair that's set up in the middle of the gallery that's kept empty, and she walks around looking people eye to eye, and then chooses somebody, and she bows and asks them if she can offer them the gift of a song. And if they accept the offer, then she escorts them over to the chair, asks them to be seated, and she steps back and sings the song for them. One of Schubert's lieder. They have 5 such lieder in their repertory, so they can mix it up a bit during a performance segment. But they're typically about 3 minutes in length, and it's just a very intense, and they have to go through an audition process because they have to be able to convey this sense of deep connectedness and giving. And it's pretty moving. So when you go to the exhibit at MoCA, what they have is a television screen with headphones. So you can put the headphones on and you can go through, a performance of this with several people. And it's like, people are just blown away. So that's one part of this exhibit. Another part is they have a sewer, so we could maybe get Mark set up there as one of the volunteers, and visitors are invited to bring anything that's in need of mending. But since this is an art exhibit, the mending isn't done in a way that will blend in, and it's done with very colorful threads, so it becomes an artistic creation. And there was a woman there diligently working away at her table, and it was a long table with all these pieces that had already been brought in. So I engaged her in some conversation, but yeah, she's just there to accept whatever people bring and to mend them.
Will she finish my rockasses?
Well, she would, but I don't think it would pass muster with Karen. So that's the drawback. You'd have to pull the threads out and do it over again anyway. So I don't recommend that. So that was the second part. And then the third part is this long, rectangular, kind of like a low-set countertop, that in the middle of it is this natural-looking channel that's dug out, and it's a granite countertop. I think it was black, and there's just a row of, I don't know how many flowers but they're real flowers in little glasses of water. And visitors to the museum are invited to take one of these and then give it to somebody outside the museum as a gift. So you go into this large gallery with these three things, and you can't help but leave there being deeply moved by this practice of dana, of generosity. So I look forward to getting back in there, so if anybody is interested in going, let me know when you're going to go, because I might join up with you. And the admission is free. That's a recent change they've made there.
Next time.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, I highly, highly recommend it. So.
Thanks for sharing that, Dean. That was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to the topic I wanted to spend a bit of time this morning looking at. And this is one of those things that just kind of popped in my head overnight, so that's why I say it's kind of being slapped together. It's a kind of a work in progress. But it's one that I think Aaron will appreciate, since he's entering med school, and probably even Jeff, since he's involved in alt medicine, we'll call it. It's this notion of homeostasis, in relating that to Buddhism. When that thought kind of popped into my head and I mulled it over a bit, I really began to think that if the Buddha if the next Maitreya Buddha was to appear now, the teachings about suffering and the release from suffering might make reference, might be based on this notion of homeostasis, because what I'm going to bring to your attention this morning along these lines is kind of two levels of it. One level, down at the micro level, well, maybe not quite micro like in cellular, but our sense of self and how that arises from homeostasis, according to some people. And not just flaky Buddhists, but actually people with scientific advanced degrees. And that's where I brought down a couple of books, both by scientists. And this one is certainly not considered to be a flake. Antonio Damasio, I've read a number of his works. And this one, even if I wasn't familiar with him already, I would have picked up simply because of its obvious bearing on Buddhist practice. Self comes to mind, constructing the conscious brain. What gives us our sense of self that we have? Because clearly we have such a self, a sense of it. And Buddhism doesn't take issue with that. We're just saying we need to look a little more deeply into that, which we're going to move on to that. But what is the sense of self that we have? And maybe the best place to begin is, that's why I was running around looking for my phone. Anytime I'm looking for a definition, I just go to Wikipedia. And for homeostasis, because we need to have a basic understanding of what that's referring to. And I'll just read to you at least the first part of the definition. It goes on because it's kind of a complex topic. And we'll just dig into a wee bit of the complexity this morning. In biology, homeostasis is the state of steady internal physical and chemical conditions maintained by living systems. This dynamic state of equilibrium is the condition of optimal functioning for the organism and includes many variables, such as body temperature and fluid balance, being kept within certain preset limits, the homeostatic range. Other variables include the pH of extracellular fluid, concentrations of sodium, potassium, and calcium ions, so on and so forth. But there's this sense of that is uniquely connected to our sense of self, is a sense of well-being in terms of our homeostasis. What is our well-being? Now clearly, and just from that description I shared with you, it's dependent on many factors that are external of this skin bag. But we have this sensory capability, a monitoring that's constantly in place within our body to signify when there's something wrong. And that's connected to our sense of self. So we do have, and of necessity we have, a sense of self. Otherwise, you could have something not quite right with yourself, but if you're so immersed in being just one with all beings, you'd never know, right? You'd be so deeply involved in a compassionate, loving kindness way with others that you would just completely lose sense of self. And I don't think even Mother Teresa had that issue to deal with. She could tell herself. She wasn't hindered by that sense of self in terms of her ability to relate to others and care for them and be compassionate and show loving kindness. But homeostasis, to understand the vital role it plays for us. And also, when we step outside of our skin bag and start practicing with other beings, we need to be in a good place ourselves in order to help other beings. So it also wouldn't be helpful to others if we didn't have that sense of self and care for ourselves. If we're a mess, we're just going to spread that messiness around. So it's important to have a sense of self at that basic level and care for yourself. It enables us then to go forth and care for others. And to put it in terms of suffering. You know, this is going now beyond the basic Western medicine in that view. But as medicine takes on a more holistic view, maybe it's starting to catch up with this notion of dukkha. That suffering, which is basically in this homeostasis context, can now be seen as you know, our internal system is not harmonious, is not in balance. Something is wrong. So obviously, mental states can be prime drivers there that take us out of a homeostatic place. And within Buddhist teachings, you know, the importance of serenity, tranquility, joy could be seen as pointing to being in a pretty good homeostatic place because we've stilled our mind. And the afflictions that our mind creates for us are allowed to settle out. And that puts us in a good place. And in turn then, allows us to go forth and play a role in putting others in a good place as well. So it's just another way of looking at the role of suffering and the release therefrom in terms of a more contemporary notion. And if we take that, so as I said, we were going to start at the micro level, at least the level of an individual self, but now we're going to, shoot it out to a more cosmic level. And that's the second book I brought down by somebody who was considered a bit of a flake by some scientists, but he was a scientist, James Lovelock. The person who wrote several books about the Gaia hypothesis. And Gaia, of course, is the Earth Mother Goddess, and it was kind of taking the entire planet Earth as also being an entity where homeostasis was being played out, kind of a super organism, kind of very radical ecological worldview, that the world is so deeply intertwined, it's like the cells in our body. Each component of planet Earth is feeding back on this entire superorganism. And Earth has the means to kind of self-regulate to a homeostatic harmony and balance. So it can be responsive to disturbances, just like our body can. So it was kind of a radical in its day.
Almost common sense nowadays.
Well, yeah. And his wife during much of this time was a very major figure in the field of microbiology, environmental biology, Lynn Margulis. And she wasn't seen as being quite the flake he was, and she was fully on board with it. So she was very much in support of this hypothesis. So this is taking that same kind of conceptual overlay, and it is conceptual, Lakshana, we can call it, but it could be a concept that helps us guide us towards liberation, I think. So that makes it a helpful, skillful conceptual scheme, potentially, which is the primary reason for sharing it this morning, is to have this sense with other beings of the oneness that Lovelock was laying out in the Ages of Gaia. And also balance with the sense of homeostasis that Damasio is mapping out in terms of individual selves, so that we can, because our practice is with individual selves. Our notion of Earth is purely conceptual. We don't deal directly with Earth. We deal with aspects of what we call Earth in its totality. But we're working with people that are right here. And Earth is just the vastest way of seeing the interdependence that we all share together. So we can cast that in terms of Earth, or solar system, or galaxy, or however far out you want to go with it. But those are still, just notions entirely. Where the flesh and the blood and the marrow really comes into play is with actual fellow selves, where we can practice. And practice in this sense of respecting, for one thing, everybody is seeking homeostasis. And to be responsive to that. Another outside story I'll pull into this in this regard, and I referenced it a bit Thursday night. Last Sunday, since we didn't get together to sit because of the Zazenkai the day before, I seized the opportunity to finally hear Scott play his church organ. Yeah. And that entailed having a chance to sit through a Lutheran service. And my daughter went to Lutheran school for a few years, so it wasn't a brand new experience, but it was what I hadn't had in a few decades. So it was really pretty impactful for me. And the sermon that morning was about the Jesus parable of the Good Samaritan. So talk about being able to respond, and how that transcends any formal notion of spirituality, religious practice. Because the Samaritan was the kind of the outcast figure. That was the power of the story. The first two people that walked past the injured person were good, upstanding. For us, we'll put it in the Buddhist vein. They were Buddhist priests. They were probably members of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association. I mean, they were spot on. But they were in a hurry. They probably had a Dharma talk they were going off to give. There they went. And then, this Brad Warner figure, some punk rocker, comes along. And he's the one that stops and cares for the Samaritan and gets him to an inn and tells the innkeeper, you take care of him and you give me the bill, whatever it is. As the minister pointed out, basically gave him a blank check. Got a check out of his checkbook. Said, here it's signed. Just take care of it. And all of that, the whole story gets laid out because of a question posed to Jesus. Just like the Diamond Sutra is Subhuti posing his questions to the Buddha. Well, this is a question posed to Jesus about, hopefully I'll get it phrased pretty much the correct way, but the question essentially was that the Jewish teaching was that you should love the Lord with your whole body and mind and all that, and also care for your neighbor that way. So he was asking, and then he asked Jesus, who's my neighbor? And that was Jesus' response to him. Just as powerful as any Buddhist teaching, the parables from the Lotus Sutra. I mean, that's wow. And of course, given current events along the border, very timely to have that in mind. So I should have encouraged him to do a field trip along the border and become a guest minister at all the Lutheran churches down there. But so to be able to have this sense of all these homeostatic systems out there, that to care for each one is to care for the whole, and vice versa. And the only way we can care for this abstraction of planet Earth is to care for each and everything. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. And with each being we save, then as our Christian brethren would say, well, that's loving God with your whole body and mind. That's it. That's it. Care for the Samaritans, especially the ones that are being shunned by others, the ones that are in need. Just as as this example showed, they care for us. And certainly, despite the way our immigrant population gets portrayed as being murderers and rapists, I mean, the reality is they come here and contribute to the economy and care for people. So one article I recently read, and this kind of harkens back to the Zazenkai talk about what is real, the way numbers can be thrown out in a way that's intended to be deceptive. There was talk about several thousand illegal immigrants that were guilty of felony type crimes or something, and the person who was writing this piece pointed out that, you have to look at the size of the overall population. It's like a much, much smaller percentage than if you took the population at large. The U.S. citizen population. But to throw a raw number out there, it's impactful. People go, wow, we do have a problem. But if you're afraid of them, you should be way more afraid of your neighbor. Right? The ability of people just to deceive.
I've always had an innate dislike of the Made in America, America Proud, taking jobs away from America. That whole stance, it just doesn't make any.
Right.
It's just borders, walls. Yeah,
Right.
it just doesn't make any sense. And they're taking our jobs to Mexico and China. Well, they need the jobs more than we do, obviously. They're willing to do them for less. And I remember just having a conversation with an old professor of mine that there's this, I can't remember what he called it, you may know, where those undeveloped countries, the jobs and the industry goes there because it's so cheap, and then it turns those, like look at China now, where it's almost like a third world country 25 years ago.
Then they went from there to Vietnam and
yeah, so it's
Indonesia.
like it kind of builds up until it gets not cost prohibitive to stay there. Then they move to the next impoverished country and build that one up.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's kind of by sharing that wealth in the industry, we're either ruining everybody to the level we've been ruined to, or we're elevating everybody to the level, slowly.
Right.
So it was an interesting outlook. I remember when that guy, when I learned that theory 20 years ago, it was kind of an eye-opener to me. Like, we're just leveling the global economy, if you will, but it's a very slow process.
Right. And when that happens, and a similar thing gets tossed out there about raising the minimum wage to $15, all these jobs it's going to cost, which actually aren't that many as a percentage. But they throw it out as, it's well over 1 million jobs.
The jobs created by the spending by those that are making more than one.
Exactly. Right. But, so we do need to be concerned about and responsive to those that are displaced from those things. Mm-hmm. So certainly. But to have faith in the fact that it will, if the intention, so now we can come back to a good Buddhist lodestar for us about what is our intention? Is it coming from one of the three poisons, greed, hatred, delusion? Or are we really intending to help all beings? And in that process, in that process, certain beings may be at this time disadvantaged, and to say, well, we need to step in and address that issue. But if the intent isn't to be of benefit to beings, but rather, and this is what corporations are, what they do is just to increase profits, then there's no concern about that at all. You go where the cheaper wages are, and it's just kind of an accident that it's beneficial to anybody.
You're exploiting them.
They're not. Because
I call customer service and I can't understand what the dude's saying. Damn tone deafness I have on the phone.
But along those lines, I had some experience in connection with Shady Brook and my role as a treasurer with them. We had to get our QuickBooks account reestablished, and I was on the phone quite a bit with customer service reps from a certain country in South Asia, and there was a little bit of a challenge sometimes in understanding what they were saying, but man, they wanted to be helpful, big time. So, okay.
There's certainly opportunities for us to work on patience and tolerance.
Amen.
Acceptance and those kinds of things. Just like, in the parable, the guy that was hurt, he offered you know, the Good Samaritan, this opportunity to be helpful, and how rich that experience is of being able to be helpful. You know, as we say in Buddhism, there's the giver, the receiver, and the gift.
Yeah.
But in that scenario, you know, who's really the giver and receiver? You know?
Right. It always
so-
goes both ways.
It does.
Yeah, yeah.
It truly does.
Yeah.
Um,
One final point from my Christian experience last Sunday was, of course, the Lord's Prayer factored into the service, and it dawned on me. And I don't think it had ever struck me before, but the phrasing, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our
trespasses.
yeah, as we forgive those who trespass against us. So that the latter part about the trespasses, it is kind of referencing that circularity, the back and forth, that as we forgive those who trespass against us, then forgive us our trespasses. But the give us this day our daily bread also should be seen in the exact same way, it seemed to me. That, well, we're also responsible for making sure others are receiving their daily bread. It's got to be a round trip here. We have to go both directions. So that's why the Tenzo role is so vital in Zen Sanghas, is the opportunity to receive our daily bread and make sure that we're well cared for. I mean, that is a powerful practice. And it was kind of radical for Dogen to set that up as one of the highest positions at a temple. Because the cook was generally seen as like, well, a cook. No.
That's right. You guys will have to wrestle it for me.
This is the person who's giving you your daily bread, and that's pretty tall service there to be providing and to care at that basic level. And we kind of come full circle back to homeostasis. If we weren't receiving that, we'd be a mess by the end of the day, right? We wouldn't be functioning too well.
I believe the first monk that Dogen met when he went to China was a cook.
That's right. Yeah. He had a very important, that's where Dogen learned his lesson about the importance of the Tenzo. So, teaching number 1, right off the boat. Fortunately, he's not trying to get into the U.S. in 2019. He wouldn't get off the boat. Be sent to the detention center for processing.
Well, I personally would not be here if the United States didn't accept refugees.
Well,
both my parents are refugees. My older brother and older sister are refugees. My sister survived, was almost sent to the concentration camps during World War II as a child. So for me, it has a lot of resonance.
Yeah.
My parents came over and became integral parts of this U.S. economy, and so I know that it's certainly very possible for anyone coming over. So it's really disturbing to see our current policies. It's some real insanity going on. It does remind me of when I see our president. He reminds me of Adolf Hitler. His rhetoric and his mannerisms and gestures and so forth, and certainly his policies are similar. And if we continued in this vein, it would be very, very disturbing. I think it just calls on all of us to be socially active, however, whatever ways we choose to do that. But,
Yeah, I agree.
Our practice is a social practice.
Yeah. Because whether we call it homeostasis or interdependence, it points to just that very fact that we are doing this for all beings. We can have the intent of that, or just be completely ignorant of it, ignore it. And we choose getting on the bodhisattva path to have the intent. Yeah, we see that with Prajna. We're acting in accord, except during our deluded moments, which pop up from time to time. But that's where the importance of vow is. We keep coming back because it's a serious intent.
I was also thinking about something else, going back to the earlier part of your talk when you were talking about, how the relationship between self and the more cosmic, the earth, for example, and how helpful the four elements are, which is kind of an ancient Buddhist way of seeing things, the four elements, fire, air, water, and earth, and how we see ourselves as being made up of those elements. And I'd done some reading recently about breath and air, and how we become one with air, and of course the same is true of the other elements as well.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of it really helps to break down this sense of this is me and my body, and it's just a more interactive way of looking at it.
Oh yeah, I think that's exactly right, and it should be very, very helpful. I mean, earth obviously is the food we take in, all the nutrients that are vital to life. Water goes without saying, and fire without the sun. Without the sun, we really are toast. Cold toast. So yeah. Anything else? May our intention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.